Now I will talk about the duty of care, wide and depth, because this is what actually is important to you. How do you implement these procedures, and how do you get around it all? So we have the wide, which is who. Now, which is who. Who does this actually cover? Our duty of care obligation. And then you have the depth, which is what. What do we actually need to do? And it is extremely important to have procedures, have plans, and have taken decision on both the wide and the depth. So if we start by digging into the wide, the who. Who does your duty of care responsibility cover? The thing you have to do as responsible for risk management and also duty of care is that you need to create an overview. Who do we actually have? Who are actually working with us? Do we have visitors? Do we have subsidiaries? Do we have local employees? List it all down, get an overview. Then you have to, along with the executive level, take a decision. Who is actually covered by our duty of care? Who do we actually take responsibility for? And then you have to say, these are the persons, and these are not the persons that include. So we do not have a duty of care to sub-suppliers, drivers, and visitors, if that's what you decide. And then the most important thing, to communicate. You need to communicate this. So if you on forehand has said, okay, this is who we cover, and you as a visitor are not covered by our duty of care. Or you as a sub-supplier are not covered by our duty of care, but we have these standards that you need to be compliant with. So set some kind of borders, some kind of limits, that this is what you want for those who are not covered but you work with, and this is what you want for the ones that you have the duty of care employees. So that's the wide, that's the who are we actually talking about when we talk duty of care. Now we are talking about what. So what do we actually then need to do? How do we actually implement this? So now we know who is covered, but how do we actually cover them? So first of all, you need to make travel security policies. That includes following, and this is in my world a minimum, and I think it could be interesting to have, or it could be helpful if the foreign ministry of Denmark and Finland said this, because then we would have a standard, but we don't have a standard, so we need to put up our own standards. In my world, this is the standards that you need. So you need to have written down the wide. Who is this covering? That's step one. Then you need to set your ambitions for security and safety training. So if we send employees to high-risk countries, they should have a one-day travel security training. If we send them to extreme-risk countries, they should have a 3-day heat course. You need to decide, or you need to write, they don't need to, but you need to decide on your ambitions for security and safety training. And right now, best practice within this is that if you have in the red countries, the high and extreme risk countries, then you need to supply with heat courses. Then you need to supply your employees with risk assessment and mitigation measures. So before they go, they need to know what kind of threats are there and how do we mitigate them. So that could be going to visit a refugee camp in Kenya. Well, there is a threat of kidnap. We mitigate this by driving in armored vehicles. So when you do the assessment, you should of course also be willing to take the steps that needed in order to reduce the vulnerability of the traveler. So you need the capacity to give these assessments, and you can buy this externally or you can have it internally in your own company. That doesn't really matter. You just need to supply the travelers with that. And then of course you need some insurance that are matching the requirements. So if you're going places where there is kidnappings taking place, well then you of course need a KNR insurance, kidnap and ransom insurance. If you are going places where there is civil war, then you need an insurance that covers that, because the world travel insurance correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't cover the world. There's some countries that isn't included in that. So you need to be aware what kind of countries that is covered, which are not, and what is falling out of the coverage. So you need to buy the matching insurances. And then you have to have some kind of travel management system. A lot of people say, yes, we are tracking persons, but what they actually do is that they have a travel management system because their tracking is run by a PNR. Do you know what a PNR is? Just a hand up. PNR is when you book a ticket over through your travel agent, then you can follow the traveler, then the risk manager can get an information, okay, where do we have our employees now? But that's not tracking, that's travel management systems. So in my world, it's okay to know that your traveler is in Stockholm or in Sweden for that sake. You don't need to know exactly where it is. But as soon as we send travelers to high or even extreme risk, we need to know exactly where they are. We need to track them. And I know that there's a lot of discussions with that, and we can take that in the break. But we need to know where our employees are, even by PNR, if they are not in a high risk, or by tracking precisely if they're in high risk areas. So that's the travel policy and the procedures that we need in place. Then we also need a crisis management policy, because if something goes wrong, how you handle the crisis is at least as important as what you did before. So you need to have some kind of notification and activation procedures. That means that your employees need to know who to call if something goes wrong. And then when something goes wrong, you as an organization need to know who is actually stepping together and handling this crisis. It cannot just be ad hoc, we need to call Peter down from the third because he knows something about this and this. It needs to be planned, and those persons need to be trained. There need to be clearly roles and responsibility, and there need to be a clear communication. How do we handle this internally, but also important, externally? And then, yes, a standard for how often do we exercise this. When you have policies for the travel security and the crisis management, and you have all these procedures and plans written down, then you are good to go on your duty of care. A lot of companies, and that's the funny part, are really, really good at having travel policies. What's the difference on a travel policy and a travel security policy? Every company has a travel policy, I can assure you that. The travel policy dictates that you are not allowed to fly on first class, and you are not allowed to buy a 5-star hotel, but way too few has a travel security policy that actually dictates what can you do, what can you not do, and how do we mitigate the risk when you're out there.